2 elections in 2 Central American nations. We go to Camila Escalante in San Salvador, El Salvador, and Stephen Sefton in Esteli, Nicaragua. First, Camila, tell us about the election in El Salvador, since you're there.
Well, a few weeks from now, El Salvador will be holding its national elections. Nayib Bukele is up for re-election, and as everyone knows, he's extremely popular. He's popular within the country, according to the polling that we have available, but also if you just speak to people around the country, people are very pleased with the level of perceived security, at least. They feel that the country has become a lot more secure in terms of the violence that this country has seen for so long, with the gangs, with violent crime, robberies, and things like that. This is something that Nayib Bukele, about 2 years ago, began implementing a sort of tough on crime approach to the country, where he decided to expand the security forces of the country, the military and police, something that I believe he's done thanks to some of the resources provided by the United States for the security forces of this country. And he began a crackdown on the gangs. And in doing so, according to the government's own statistics, they have brought down the homicide levels. We're not really sure what the implications are going to be in the future, or if they'll be able to maintain this. It's not exactly the same approach that as the one that we saw so successfully carried out in Nicaragua, and this is still very new. But on the surface, it does seem that it has diminished the level of violent crime in the country. As well, he has done some sort of projects to sort of rejuvenate or given up a facelift to San Salvador, to a lot of the tourism sector. You know, they've been talking a lot about cryptocurrency with his Bitcoin little experiment that he has here. And these are things, the Bitcoin thing wasn't seen so positively by people. They continue to use the dollar. This is a dollarized economy. And this is, they've kind of stuck to that. Regular Salvadorans are not adopting crypto, but a lot of tourists have come here because Nayib Bukele has put the country on the map. However, one of the things that is not in favor of the current government is that things are getting very difficult economically. The price of living is shooting up, specifically in the capital and the major cities, and the salaries remain low. And so we see a lot of people continuing to leave the country and hoping for a better life in the United States or Mexico. And so you see a lot of professionals over the years, as happened in previous administrations. It hasn't come to an end now. People continue to leave in really huge numbers, seeking better economic opportunity. But going back to the election that's coming up, he faces very little opposition in terms of anyone who actually could stand a chance. People are going to receive very low, even single-digit numbers in the vote. Going up against Nayib Bukele is what's being projected. And, the leftist party that governed previously in the last decade, the FMLN, is not even going to factor. And unfortunately, people saying that even in the National Assembly, it's going to be a bit of a sweep for Nayib Bukele's Nueva Ideas, and that the left is going to fare very poorly. That's what we're projecting here.
Are we talking about basically this is a law and order consequence, quote unquote, of the violence that took place while the left was governing?
Well, it was long before the left was governing. This has been a really, difficult problem since, going back to the armed conflict here. There was a lot of people who, weren't really perhaps properly put back into society with proper jobs. There's been huge inequality going back to those years of neoliberal policies here in El Salvador. And of course, the gangs that grouped in the United States and LA and those places, and they came back to El Salvador to cause problems here. But the gangs such as 13th Street Gang, 18th Street Gang, those are the ones that have been plaguing the country with violence for so many years.
Gotcha. So, yeah, perhaps it is an interesting type of warfare that's being conducted. Okay. So, Stephen, let's talk about Guatemala.
Okay, so and the situation in Guatemala has been that Bernardo Arévalo has now taken office. He was the successful presidential candidate in the elections last year. But that electoral process and even the process for his assumption of taking office have been dogged by really vicious and internecine conflict within the governing institutions among themselves, for example, between the Constitutional Court and the Minister of Public Prosecution, the Public Prosecutor's Office, and then it also targeting Bernardo Arévalo and trying to do everything they could to hinder a smooth process for him taking office as he did last Sunday, January 14th. And one of the things that they've tried to do, the ruling elite control in large part the judiciary. The previous government and its allies named the public prosecutor, and they acted in a blatantly politically partial way to attack Bernardo Arévalo's party called Semilla, which is a kind of social democrat party with a strong middle-class base. And Arévalo himself I think he's the grandson of first president after the demise of the dictatorship of General Ubico in Guatemala after the Second World War. And that government was subsequently Echeverría.
Arévalo surrendered power after an election to Arbenz, who was then removed by the CIA.
So, symbolically, Bernardo Arévalo represents the kind of a new dawn of democracy in Guatemala. That's how he's always portrayed himself, as somebody who's challenging the corrupt ruling elites. And it may be worth pointing out in this context that the former president, Alejandro Giammattei, was denied entry to the United States recently, presumably on the basis that they regard him as somebody who's a corrupt individual. But anyway, the public prosecutor did everything they could to criminalize Semilla, although Giammattei did eventually engage in a handover process prior to last Sunday's presidential inauguration. It was dogged by disputes. And Bernardo Arévalo was constantly claiming that he was being subject to a kind of coup even before he'd been elected. But anyway, he took office, and at that time, on that day, right up to the moment of him taking office, there was a dispute in the Congress about whether the new Junta Directiva of the legislature in Guatemala was going to be elected legitimately or not, and that was holding up the actual inauguration itself, the event of the inauguration. But that was resolved, and now the Constitutional Court has ruled against that election of the Junta Directiva and has ordered the legislature to vote again and install a new Junta Directiva. And this is just an example of the way that the Guatemalan elites and the institutions that they control are going to be persistently blocking the legislative program of Bernardo Arévalo, although they can't really prevent his actions in the executive area. But you can see that that's going to be the pattern in the future, very much along the lines of what happened in Peru. If you remember what happened in Peru, Pedro Castillo was elected but couldn't do anything to implement his program because of opposition from the established elites and the institutions they control and their control of deputies in the National Assembly and the legislature. And something similar confronts Bernardo Arévalo.
Yep, and this is apparently the model that prevails in this hemisphere, including in the United States these days. Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate you, both of you participating and giving us a hand today. And we'll speak with you again next week.
Thanks a million,
Talk
Don.
to you next week, Don.
Thank you very much. For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.